Hoş geldiniz. I will do my introduction in
Welcome. Ben İngiliz
yapacağım müsaadelerinizle. Konuşmacıların hepsi İngilizce hazırlandıkları için. Okay, we're starting with Laurence Ritter, who is a freelance researcher and journalist. She has a PhD in sociology. She has lived 7 years in Armenia, working as a scholar and journalist. Her thesis was published in 2007, The Long March of Armenians, History and Future of a Diaspora. And her other book is entitled Remains of the Sword, Hidden Armenians and Islamized Armenians of Turkey, which she has prepared with her husband, photographs of her husband, Max Arshak Sivaslian. And now she will be starting the presentations with her talk entitled Reconstructing Identity, The Importance of Feminist Structure Among Hidden and Islamized Armenians, a Case Study Approach. So.
Well, thank you. First, maybe I just want to say that this paper is based on the survey itself. We conducted mainly in Istanbul and Eastern Turkey. A survey that has been published, as you said, in French first, and which has just been published by the Hrant Dink Foundation, that I want to thank very much. I really appreciate that this book has been published in Turkish, because actually all the testimonies I gathered throughout the survey were in Turkish, and I hope the people now can read it. And so many thanks to the Hrant Dink Foundation, many thanks to Cengiz Aktar, who accepted first to write the foreword of the book. So our study, because my husband is a great part of it, aimed to better document this quote-unquote phenomenon of Islamized and hidden Armenian in Turkey. And one more time, I focused mainly on Eastern Turkey, not Central Turkey, not Western Turkey. So mainly the interaction between hidden and Islamized Armenian in Eastern Turkey and the local inhabitants, who are, as you know, mainly Kurdish people. So in this paper, what I want to do is to further document the way those families that I met evolve in such ways that in some cases where you end up at the third or fourth generation with people who can still call themselves very freely Armenian, though the religious element might not be there, and with somewhat just like so acculturate that almost nothing remained but the distant memory and fading memory that the grandparents or foregrandparents have been Armenian. So how it is, like in a big clan, one branch of a family which is strictly endogamous, and another branch of the family which is also strictly endogamous, ended up by having individuals of the third or fourth generation calling themselves Armenian, while the other is like, yeah, well, we are rather of Armenian origin than real Armenian. So the first case study I want to introduce you is, in fact, linked to all the survey we conducted in this very remote and gorgeous place of Sassoon, where live many of those Armenian clans, because I can really call them families. They are consisting into big clans, in fact. I met a man who is now 70 years old, and his younger brother, who is 55. The older brother is a Christian Armenian, maybe one of the very few Christian Armenian who still remain in Sassoon, and who eventually moved to Istanbul maybe 20 years ago, and where the children were born and taught and followed the Armenian school, and somehow went back to the Armenian identity defined by the church, by the Christian faith, and so on and so forth. The younger brother, who is 55, and that I met also in Istanbul, made it to Istanbul along with his family in the late 90s. And when I was doing an interview with them, it was in some part of Istanbul, I mean, the ladies were wearing the headscarf, The younger daughters up to the older daughter were telling me, Islam for us is a true faith. Yes, we are Armenian, but we are Muslim Armenian. So how comes that in one case we have one brother who somehow remain Christian, and the other one who is just simply like, no, he is converted, he is a true believer in Islam, he has no, I would say, he never thought about his life as being something else but what it is. And the mother herself was telling us, my daughter will marry people of our kind, meaning Armenian, but Islamized Armenian. So that's quite striking to some point, because I think that just by telling that, I'm giving you a few elements about how complex this question will be, and how the complexity we are facing is on both sides, on the Turkish side and the Armenian side. By the way, when I asked this man, the older brother, how did you manage to remain Christian? And I remember in Sassoon, whenever we were passing some mountains, he was even crossing himself. And I asked, why do you cross yourself like this? Because on this mountain, there used to be this monastery. Because on this mountain, there used to be this church. Obviously, after this man will pass away, nobody would remain in Sassoon to remember this kind of thing. And he told me, I married a woman when I was younger. She's the mother of all my kids. She came from another village. She was herself from a converted family. And what happened is anytime our Allah were coming to our place along with the Oja to tell us to convert, I simply said no. So there is also some individual position in this among the family structure that impacts the further generation that developed. In some cases, the people just accepted Islam as a fact, as a social fact, and as a faith, as a belief, and some other just involved more into Armenian identity as being somehow a religious factor too. Something which is striking in the Sassoon example is also that they have another tool to preserve themselves in this quite remote area. They still use a language that even as an Armenian speaker I can't really understand, but which is a dialect very much alive, the Sassoon-Si dialect. So they distinguish themselves from the Kurdish and Alevi and Arabic people from the Sassoon also thanks to this language. But there is a border, however, between these Christians, Armenians still living there, and those Islamized, even when they are direct brother and direct cousin. So another element about the importance of the family structure upon retaining some pieces of the Armenian identity is a second case that I made in the area of Andiaman and Karta. A man, let's call him Agop. Anyway, in the book, most of the name, as you can imagine, has been changed, unless the people were willing to give their real name. Agop is in his 30s, and when he was a young guy, I quote him, he said, until the age of 14, I thought I was a Turk and a Muslim, and I even think I was proud of it. We were respecting the Muslim holidays. I was going to pray to the mosque. Our parents never mentioned nothing to us, meaning that in this family, the silence has been kept. For some reason, many families thought that for fear of what could happen from the social environment, from the government, that it was better to remain silent about the Armenian origins and the Armenian descent and the Armenian identity. So what happened is that his father, who was a civil servant, was once called to a much smaller place in the Adiyaman region. In this village, what did they find? Islamized Armenian living along with maybe 10 families of Christian Armenian and themselves. And I quote again this man. As children, we became friends with both of these families, of course, and we started with the children to wonder question. The very way the Armenian Christian family was living struck us. they were never even really close to Islamized Armenian. Eventually, we start to ask questions to our parents themselves. And once my mother took us all the siblings of the family, and she told us, yes, we are Armenian, I'm Armenian, your father is Armenian, our grandparents are Armenian, just like those Armenians you are living with in this village. Eventually he moved to Istanbul, he married an Armenian from his area. That's also something which is important to dwell on, but I'm afraid I don't have time to. And he got his first child baptized here in Istanbul. So this kind of story, I believe, the latest case study I was presenting tell us two things. Compared with other stories we might have collected, in this family where silence has been kept, it is mostly the woman to some point, specifically the mother, and Fethiye Chetim knows about that, that breaks the silence to some point inside the family structure. Inside the chain of events that transform one people to what it is now, most of the time that in this family structure, inside this family element, the woman element that breaks the chain of silence and of secrets, of family secrets. The other thing also that it tells us is that in many cases, I believe it's the fear inherited from the genocide that somehow oblige the people to remain silent, but not only. And the third thing I want also to insist on is that the endogamous practices, but maybe that's a point that I will leave for the conclusion, has been a common pattern among many, many Islamized Armenians, not because it was a way only to stay between together, but because of the persistence of some discrimination between themselves and the environment, the social environment they were living in. So the third case might be even clearer on this. It's in the area of Müge, a man who is now like 55 or 56 maybe. Let's call him, I don't know, Syrup, for instance. And this man originated from Sassoon. His grandfather was a small boy surviving the genocide, sheltered by a Kurd, and then who served as a servant into the Kurdish household he was brought to. And the grandfather, of course, being maybe 6 or 7 years old when the genocide happened, just could not remember much from the Armenian identity, as you can imagine. I mean, not a lot of elements were there. And the thing that happened, he married an Armenian woman, and they stick to this pattern of endogamous marriages up to now. And this man I'm talking about is married himself to an Armenian. And he recalled from me the very way it happened in his family. He can remember perfectly his grandparents. And I quote him, "We as children, when we were little, we were wondering what was this strange language our old, very old grandparents were talking together. We were wondering, but we never asked actually. But we were wondering why did they close down the window and the door when we were speaking it." And in fact, what I want to make, the point I want to make here is like in this family too from Müge area, silence has never been kept. They all know they are Armenians, but it's like a puzzle left to the younger generation, and that they have to, go through. They have elements like this. Some individual might choose to get rid of this element, and some others just try to have the puzzle back, to have the complete picture of what they think they are, what they have been told what they are, and what they might be becoming afterward. I believe, thanks. So I believe these three case studies, I have many in the books, and I'm sorry I can't introduce more here, but I believe that a few conclusions can be drawn out of this. As I was saying, I don't think endogamy was compulsory a strategy among survivors. It might have been in some cases, in many cases, but it's not always like the Armenian survivor were striving for having other Armenian. it has been also because of the rule of the Ara and the Asheret back in Eastern Turkey. It's also this kind of, how can I should say that, village social environment that was like, okay, I have a small boy who is an Armenian, you have a small girl who is an Armenian, let's have married together. That's the way it happens in many cases. Now, in the generation afterward, okay, they went on marrying together, but what I want to make, the point I want to make, it's like it's not compulsory, one more time, a strategy. Now it might be a strategy, yes. Back in the third, fourth generation now, yes, the between us aspect, and the only way to preserve it might be the endogamous marriages, but it's not the only way to somehow go back, if there is such thing in their mind, to Armenian identity. The second point I want to make and to dwell on might be the most important, and that's what we have been talking about during this conference, is that Islamization is a process. It's the result and not the cause of acculturation. And more important to me is not the Islamization of these people, it's the acculturation. It's the fact that they have been deprived from identity, and not only about religious identity. And a lot of talks that I've heard, or that I've been faces that I've been involved to among Armenians, is like what we should do, what is the position we should have about those Islamized Armenians. That's, of course, a very important question. And it's stirring a lot of discussion in Armenia, in the diaspora. And to me, this question of Islamized Armenian is not only important to Turkey past, present, and future. It's also very important for the Armenian, wherever they are, in diaspora or in Armenia. It is very important because it questions a very Armenian identity, and to which extent this identity might accept some kind of quote-unquote otherness inside what it considers to be Armenianness. Thank you. Teşekkür ederim.
Thank you very much. We're continuing with Anoush Suni. She's a doctoral student in the anthropology department at the University of California, Los Angeles. She's interested in questions of memory, history, space, and the built environment, specifically how local history is constructed, preserved, and narrated through stories about landscape and ruins in Eastern Anatolia. She completed her BA in Middle East Studies at Ponoma College in 2009 and her MA in Turkish Studies at Sabancı University. Suni states that the question of Islamized Armenians in Turkey gestures towards silenced histories of violence, process of nation building, and issues of inclusion and exclusion that remain salient in Turkey today. And in her presentation entitled Displacement and the Production of Difference, Islamized Armenians and Imagined Geographies, she will explore the production of difference in relation to the histories of Islamized Armenians through the lens of the politics of place and processes of displacement, both physical and symbolic.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. I'd like, before I begin, to thank the Hrant Dink Foundation and the organizers of this conference for having me here. It's been a wonderful 3 days. I've enjoyed every minute of it. And before I begin, I'd like to mention that the interview that I'm using for this paper was part of oral history research that I conducted in 2011 in Istanbul in English. And so I have not translated the quotes there directly, the words of my interlocutor, and all the proper names have been changed. So, the question of Islamized Armenians in Turkey gestures towards silenced histories of violence, processes of nation building, and issues of inclusion and exclusion that remain salient in Turkey today. In this paper, I will explore the production of difference in relation to the histories of Islamized Armenians through the lens of the politics of place and processes of displacement, both physical and symbolic. The image of a Muslim Armenian highlights the fundamental instability and permeability of taken for granted categories such as Armenian, Kurd, or Turk. Nationalist imaginaries construct these groups as mutually exclusive categories that map neatly onto their respective national territories. Turks in Turkey and Armenians in Armenia, and Kurds either ignored or in some understanding of a Kurdistan. These imagined geographies, representations of national homelands mapped onto territory in overlapping layers, capture in spatial terms the paradox of Islamized Armenians. To what map do they belong? From which are they excluded, and by whom? In this paper, I will build on the work of geographer Tim Cresswell as I explore the question of Islamized Armenians as a group that is perpetually, quote-unquote, out of place, existing in the margins of the dominant nationalist imaginaries, having been both physically and symbolically displaced. I will also draw on the work of anthropologists Akhil Gupta and James Ferguson, who, in the article Beyond Culture, call for a rejection of received categories of difference and suggest a focus on the historical processes and power relations involved in the production of difference. I will approach the question of Islamized Armenians with an attention to the politics of place and the way in which place and displacement serve to construct and reify difference and otherness. Over the last century, beginning during the decline of the Ottoman Empire and the founding of the Republic of Turkey, there has been a concerted effort to homogenize Anatolia ethnically, culturally, linguistically, religiously, as we've been hearing over the last 2 days, with the goal of producing a Turkish Sunni Muslim population. Among these policies and processes were the 1915 genocide of Ottoman Armenians and Assyrians, ongoing repressions and attempts to assimilate Kurdish communities, and the Turkification of surnames and village names. Such processes of assimilation, forced migration, and name changing, in addition to massacres and other such explicit acts of violence, resulted in massive displacement of communities and individuals. Geographer Tim Cresswell discusses the question of displacement in terms of being in place or out of place. Cresswell points to refugees as, quote, people who are constituted by their displacement, and both refugees and the homeless as, quote, people without place. Cresswell suggests that, quote, the drawing and the construction of national identities were all necessary conditions for the production of the refugee as a person out of place. The place they were out of was the nation, end quote. In the case of the transition from the Ottoman Empire to the Turkish nation-state, it was the ethnic and religious minorities who became out of place, either as internal refugees or simply as the unwelcome ethnic or religious other inside the boundaries of the nation. In light of these questions of displacement, I will explore the story of one man whose life and family history illuminates the precarious position inhabited by Islamized Armenians within the real and imagined geographies of Eastern Anatolia. My interlocutor, Armen, was born in a Kurdish village in the province of Batman in the late 1970s. Armen traces his lineage to his paternal grandfather, Sarkis, who was an Armenian. In 1915, 14-year-old Sarkis was arrested and imprisoned along with the rest of the men from his village, but he managed to escape through a hole in the prison wall while the rest of the men were killed. With all of his family dead or gone after the massacres, Sarkis converted to Islam, took on a Muslim name, Mehmet, married an Arab woman, and had a son who he named Cemal, another Muslim name. Mehmet and his new family managed to return to his natal village and were able to reclaim some of his property and began raising sheep. But after some time, his new wife ran away, and shortly after, he died, leaving his son, 7-year-old Cemal, an orphan. With his only kin and thus his only protection gone, young Cemal lost his property, his sheep, and his livelihood, and was left placeless for years, wandering from village to village and working just enough to feed himself until finally he was adopted into the family of an agha. The agha, whose grandmother was also Armenian, approached the young Cemal as kin due to their shared Armenian heritage, and offered that if he came to work for him, he would treat him as a son and marry him to one of his daughters. Thus, Cemal found a place, both in terms of a village in which to finally settle down, and in terms of a role within a network of kinship. With this story, my interlocutor, Armen, traces his lineage back to an original displacement, that of his grandfather, Sarkis, from his natal village, his family, his religion, and his name. This experience of displacement was relived by Cemal, who lost his kin and his home and was similarly left placeless. In his own life, Armen embodies this series of displacements, the legacy of his grandfather's conversion, and the histories of violence experienced by his family. Armen was the 9th of 10 children. His official given name is Ibrahim, a Muslim name. He explains the background behind his use of the Armenian name Armen in the following way. Quote, "The name Armen was my great-grandfather's name. Some of my uncles and their sons would call me with this name when they would tease me and remind me of my Gavur ancestors. That would certainly serve as a reminder that I am not a full member of their community. I have a defect in my ancestry. That would make me angry when I was a child, but later I took it up as a badge of honor." End quote. Armen's adoption of an Armenian name in place of his given name serves both as an acknowledgement and identification with his Armenian ancestry, and a reversal of the process of denaming and renaming by which his grandfather became Muslim. The issue of name changing is salient in the stories of Islamized Armenians, as the many boys, girls, and women who remained in Anatolia after 1915 and who were absorbed into Muslim communities lost their religion, language, and ultimately their names. This issue of renaming as a process of taking on a new identity and of erasure of a problematic past becomes a way of moving from out of place to in place. While an Armenian name marks one as the out-of-place Christian other, adopting a Muslim name shifts the individual from being an outsider to an insider. This renaming thus effectively labels such individuals as acceptable members of the community, as they are shuffled into the category of Muslim and out of the abject category of Christian. This phenomenon of the renaming of people is paralleled by the renaming of places across Anatolia in an attempt to assimilate the heterogeneous locales into a homogeneous Turkish nation-state. Place names in quote-unquote foreign languages and marked as out of place are put back in place through the assignment of an appropriate Turkish name. The changes in place names point to the constructed nature of the boundaries of an imagined national territory. What was the Ottoman Empire, or perhaps had been Armenia, or perhaps is Kurdistan, is recreated as Turkey through the Turkification of place names. Benedict Anderson's idea of the imagined community of the nation as a historical construct is scarcely anywhere more clear than in the case of place names in contested areas within national borders, which are changed by government officials who self-consciously fabricate supposedly authentic names. Gupta and Ferguson point out that the idea of the nation-state as a homogeneous whole remains abstract for marginal and minority groups, which they describe as, quote, those who inhabit the borderlands. The authors describe the idea of the borderlands as, quote, a place of incommensurable contradictions, an interstitial zone of displacement and deterritorialization that shapes the identity of the hybridized subject, end quote. This idea of borderlands aptly describes the situation of Islamized Armenians who, displaced both physically and symbolically, inhabit not only the literal borders areas of Turkey, but also the borderlands of the boundaries of Muslim Turkishness that define the ethno-religious nation, as well as the borderlands between Christianness and Muslimness, or Armenianness and Kurdishness. For Armen, these questions of religious, ethnic, and linguistic belonging or non-belonging played out in differing ways in context, in relation to context and to his interlocutors, highlighting the way in which the Islamized Armenian is a liminal figure embodying hybridity and inhabiting the interstices of categories often assumed to be firmly bounded. In the following excerpt, Armen describes his elementary school experience, one typical for many Kurdish children who began school speaking only Kurdish in a school system with a Turkish-only policy. Quote, "Of course, the first days of school were very discouraging and very depressing because we couldn't understand the teacher. He was telling something to us we couldn't understand. He was beating some of us. The teacher was speaking Turkish, we were speaking Kurdish, and he was forbidding us from speaking Kurdish amongst us, and we were always watching if the teacher is there or not. If he was not there, we were speaking Kurdish amongst us. If he was around, we were not speaking Kurdish. It was lots of confusion, and I was thinking, why am I not a Turk? Turkish is a very good language. So you think, you have kind of an inferiority complex. I mean, I felt it most of the time. So I was seeing the teacher and his wife. They were speaking Turkish, they were rich, they were high in status, and I was so, let's say, feeling bad for being a Kurd. So my culture is inferior and my economic or social status is inferior." End quote. In the Turkish public school system, Armen, as a Kurdish-speaking student, was out of place. His language was devalued and forbidden, and he, along with the other Kurdish students, was positioned as deficient and deviant. It is through the school system that Armen comes to recognize himself as the Kurdish other to the Turkish state as represented by the teacher. Armen's otherness and out-of-placeness was compounded by his Armenian origins. While he learned of the inferiority of his position as a Kurd from the school environment, he learned about the inferiority of his Armenianness from the village, as he describes in the following passage. Quote, "After some time, we learned that we are kind of different from other guys, other normal Kurdish and Muslim guys, because they called us bafleh. In Kurdish, it means that you have Christian ancestors, but it's kind of derogatory. It's not just a definition. After primary school, I think I was fighting with someone, and they said, 'You are bafleh.' And I didn't know what was bafleh. I figured out it was something bad, and then I went to home, and I said, 'They called me bafleh. What is bafleh?' My mother said, 'Oh, they are referring to the origins of your father, but we are more Muslim than they. I mean, we are better Muslims than they.' That was the way to cope with this for my family. Then I learned, yeah, my father is Armenian. So you say, what a bad luck. Why my father is Armenian? Why am I different from all those other children?" End quote. Armen's positionality as a Kurd in school and an Armenian in the village served to mark him as a dual other. Twice marked as other, Armen was beaten in school for speaking Kurdish and degraded in the village for having Armenian ancestry. This double displacement marked Armen as out of place, both within the local Kurdish community as well as within the Turkish nation-state. In this paper, I have explored the story of Armen, the grandchild of an Armenian man who survived the genocide of 1915 and converted to Islam. This story of Armen and his family serves to demonstrate the position of Islamized Armenians as perpetually out of place, physically and symbolically, both within the Turkish nation and within the Kurdish community where they lived. The presence of Islamized Armenians within such communities points to the repressed and silenced histories of violence that led to their physical displacement from their communities and their symbolic displacement through the changing of their names, as well as the changing of the names of the places that they inhabit. It is partially through these two displacements, symbolic and physical, that difference is constructed, and Islamized Armenians are positioned as a national, religious, and ethnic other, inhabiting the borderlands between nationalist constructions of Turkishness, Armenianness, and Kurdishness. In this way, the figure of the Islamized Armenian serves to highlight the inherent contradictions and instability of such discrete categories, assumed by nationalist imaginaries that attempt to either assimilate or erase difference in an effort to create a homogeneous whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And our last speaker, last but not least, will be Helin Anahit. She was born and brought up in Istanbul, but she now lives and works in London. She is currently a doctoral candidate in the Department of Fine Art and Transcultural Studies at Middlesex University. Her dissertation, with a focus on the Armenians in Turkey, is entitled Journey Through Cultural Memory and the Armenian Experience in a Global Context. She has also conducted research questioning linear notions of trauma, time, and temporality based on interviews with prison torture victims from 1970s and 80s in Turkey. Her presentation is entitled The Rivers of Memory, Exploring Collective Memory and Cultural Assumptions Through the Voice of the Islamized Armenians in Turkey. She states that since 2005, she has embarked on a journey exploring the psyche and everyday experiences of the Armenians living in Turkey through field research, aiming to identify the multitude of layers of cultural identity and collective memory in Turkey by means of artistic research. It's not there. Oh, can you turn in, maybe do your, would you be able to, or shall I prompt you? I can prompt you if you want. Yeah. Are you okay? Oh, I know. It happens. Oh my God. I mean, I didn't shut the whole thing. Arkada göstererek istiyorsanız şey yapalım. Check if you're satisfied, because sometimes I have been putting my questions, but it will be too much. I mean, people will have. Okay. After the session is over, I just people agreed that we just will go on to the questions because we won't have time for a second round. So if you feel compelled to say something warmly,
no, if you feel compelled to ask me something, I will answer.
So I won't do summaries. I will just go ahead and have the questions. Okay. Okay. Because I just took notes, but I won't do it. We don't have much time. Okay. I just wanted you to be satisfied that you have, you had your time. Okay. Okay. So sometimes, you have questions in your mind that you want to deliver them, but.
Yes. it's better, you're right, yes.
Okay. Tamam mısınız? Sorulara geçebilir mi öbür tarafa diye düşünüyorum. 3 konuşmacı bekliyorsa. Okay. While we're waiting for the technical problems to be solved, I would be very happy if you could forward your questions for the first 3 speakers, because we won't have much time after the talk is over. So I'll be glad, please, Belek, where is the mic? Is there a mic? There should be for the translators, I believe. Could you maybe come up, Melek, if there isn't a microphone around? Oh, the mic is coming. Yeah, but the translators need to hear you. Değil mi? Okay, thank you.
Do you hear me? Yes. My question is actually to all the 3 speakers. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I have worked extensively in the southeast and east of Turkey, that's to say in the Kurdish region. And now I'm working on a film regarding what was left over of the Armenian heritage in Adana, which is in Cilicia, and the other provinces of Adana, where there was a very big massacre of Armenians in 1909. I agree with all the stories that you have told regarding the geography like Muş or Sasun. I totally agree with you, and because I'm also filming in Batman, and there, for example, my Kurdish driver, even without me asking him, said, do you know my grandmother is Armenian, she's from Sasun, etc. But now, when we come to Adana, and the other regions in Adana, like Osmaniye, Dörtyol, Sis, which is Kozan, Misis, where there were extensive Armenian populations, I have to tell you that it's not at all the same story as in the east and in the Kurdish region. Because in Adana, where there was where first the Armenians were very rich, they were big landowners, and Adana was burned down in 1909, totally. So when you go to Adana today, you don't find any trace of Armenians at all. And the whole city is anyway dominated by Turkish flags. And on top of that, on the Seyhan River, which in Zabel Eseyan's book about the disaster of 1909, and other people talk about the disaster, we know that the bodies of the killed Armenians were thrown into the Seyhan River. Well, interestingly, today in Adana, on a very high spot in the Seyhan River, which used to be a cemetery of the Armenians, the Sabancı family has built a huge mosque with 6 minarets, which dominates the whole city of Adana, and it's just on top of the Seyhan River. And I do not think that, I don't know, I visited all these places, with the exception of Kozan, which is Sis, the old religious center, where it was the only place where there was an old Armenian house that had been renovated, and there was even a plaque saying that this belonged to an Armenian family. The church, the monastery, everything had been ruined, but at least they were saying these are the ruins. But in the other locations, even in Osmaniye especially, we were told not to open our mouths even and not to talk because it's so Turkish nationalistic that, you know, it would create problems, etc., etc. And then on top of that, one person that we met in Adana, I will not give his name, of course, he's an Armenian himself. He says it openly. And he said, there are many Muslimized Armenians also in Adana and in Osmaniye and in the other locations, but they will never, ever say this because he says no one would be able to survive. So my question after telling you all this is this. After these experiences, I came to the point to think that the attitude of the Kurdish population in the southeast and east of Anatolia, where actually the Armenians used to live in great numbers, today, towards the Armenians, is not the same as in locations where there is the majority of the Turkish or ultra-Turkish nationalism. How would you evaluate this, or do you have an experience?
If you allow me, I want to have 1-2 more questions, and you can... Okay, if we have one more question here, I believe.
Thank you. I have a question to Alice and Anoush. Anoush, yes. I was wondering how they were coping with culture, actually, Muslim Armenians in your study. Because, you know, culture is not something static, is not something fixed in the past. It's always changing. So how do they cope with these changes? And to Alice, how this construction of home is related with construction of the self, actually. And for instance, does nostalgia have a role in that? Nostalgia? Feeling of nostalgia? Thank you.
One more question before we go on to the speakers, if you have. No immediate question? Okay, then we'll have the answers first. Please.
Maybe I can not answer your question very directly, but make me give you an insight of my own experience in other locations in Turkey. For instance, every time we were going to Malatya, Elazığ, Rahbet, or even Karta, Adıyaman, I mean, where the population, there is a switch in population, yes, it's not Kurdish anymore, it's more Turkish. And some places, as you said, obviously are more Turkish nationalism thing than anything else. There is, I believe, two phenomena here. We should not forget that during the genocide, Adana and most of the area like Urfa and other were also one of the final step on the road of the deportation. So a lot of Armenians I can find there are in fact Armenian who are coming from other part of Eastern Armenia. I mean, there are historians in this room who know that better than me, but I believe that most of those people who are or can call themselves Armenian, who have vague remembrance of having Armenian ancestors, are just not from this area. That's also one element that we should think about, why they are not speaking aloud about their Armenianness. We have the same situation in Urfa, by the way. So that might be linked to. So you're right, might be linked to the fact that there is a switch in the population, not Kurdish, rather Turkish, but there is also a question of geographical dimension. Most of the Armenians who are still there of Armenian descent are in fact not people, local people. So I think it has an impact there. That's my answer. I'm not sure it's correct, but that's my experience.
I will just answer you. I don't know much. I can't say much about the region. So yeah, I will just go and answer Gökçen's question. Of course, home is a tricky thing because we know that most violence to women happens in the homes. So home is never just the cozy. No, I know, but I'm taking it as an entry point to the ambivalence of home, which is never just, but I do think that the space that has opened up, what I perceive has opened up through the changes in the domestic politics and the changing sort of geographical horizons, has permitted the establishment and kind of nurturing of new relations that reach beyond the Kurdish local sort of setting. And in that sense, that the kind of new home or homeland has, of course, several dimensions. It's an imaginary one where there's all these sort of cultural.
Oysa ben bunu çok dinledim. Burada yerleşik olan, yani İstanbul'daki yerleşik olan Ermeni cemaatinin onları ötelediği ve dışladığı şeklinde pek çok şey duydum. Ayrıca Ermenistan'dan gelen Ermenilerin de çok açık ve çok sıcak davrandıklarını ve onların çok geldikleri yerde iyi ağırlandıklarını anlatan böyle çelişkili iki algı var. Tabii bütün bu ilişkiler ve yeniden kurulan bağlar ele alındığında yeni bir ana yurt arayışı da doğuyor. Bunun özlemi de doğuyor. Çünkü bu dışlanmanın da getirdiği bir tepki. Nostalji tabii ki bir rol oynuyor. Benim deneyimime göre insanlar farklı şeylerden bahsetseler bile benim izlenimim o ki bu Muş'taki Ermeni ana yurt fikrine, hayaline yönelenler aslında bu bir gelecek projesi gibi ortaya çıkıyor onların konuşmalarında. İleride belki böyle bir şey olabilir, mekanı buna çevirebiliriz gibi bir duyguyla anlatılıyor. Yani buradan çıkıp başka türlü bir geleceğe ve gelecekte başka bir ana yurda kavuşma özlemini ifade ediyor. Ancak Ermenistan'dan da bu ana yurdu, geçmişin ana yurdunu görmeye gelenlerle paylaştıkları duygusal bir bağ var tabii. Dolayısıyla bu yönelim farklı şekillerde ifadesi bulabilir ama şu anda benim görebildiğim bu. Teşekkür ederim bu sorular için. Ben de Gökçe'nin sorusuyla başlayayım. Kültürle nasıl baş ediyorlar? Bu sunumunda bir kişiyle yaptığım derinlemesine bir geçmiş çalışmasıydı. Ben burada kültür kelimesini kullanmamaya gayret ettim aslında. Umarım kullanmamışımdır. Evet, bir danışmanımın makalesine gönderme yaparken kültürün ötesi diye bir başlığı vardı, onun için kültür kelimesini kullandım. Salonda söyleneni duymuyoruz efendim, mikrofon kullanılmıyor. Evet. Evet, bu çok spesifik bir vaka. Belli bir yerden geliyor, hem coğrafi olarak hem zaman içerisinde. Ve background'da doğduğu halde Ankara'da, İstanbul'da eğitim görmüş, bir süre yurt dışında yaşamış ve bugün artık herhangi bir dinle kendini özdeşleştirmiyor. Dolayısıyla bu yeni kimliği kendisine teslim ederken Müslüman kültürü, Kürt kültürü, Ermeni kültürü gibi ayrımlara girmiyor. Ancak bir Ermeni ismi almayı seçmiş ve bu da bir şekilde kendi Ermeni geçmişiyle bir bağ kurma girişimi. Onunla ilk tanıştığımda ve kendisi Ermeni diye tanıştırdığımda Ermeni bu dedim. Ermenice konuştum. Ben Ermenice konuşmuyorum dedi bana. Benim açımdan birdenbire kafamdaki fikirleri sarstı ve onun üzerine Kürtçe konuşmaya başladı. Benim Kürtçem de berbattır ama gene de bir takım varsayımlarımın sarsıldığını gördüm o anda. Devam edeyim mi? Öbür soruya cevap vereyim mi? İzin verirsen evet. Bu faillerin sürekliliğiyle ilgili bir sorun var ki ben sunumlarda bunu bulamadım. Kahta'dan bahsettiniz. Kahta Belediye Başkanı Sayın Hrant, Vişvan aşiretinin reisi ve Zeynel Bey'in torunu ki Ermeni katliamda çok büyük bir rol oynamış. Evet, bunları yerel bir aile gibi düşünebilirsiniz ama Kahta'da bir konferansta idim ve Gazi Üniversitesi'nden bir asistan vardı. Sayın Turan'ın da akrabasıydı ve kendisini MHP'yi aşiret ağı olarak tanımlıyordu. Evet, burada sağ kurtulanlar aynı yerde yaşamaya devam ediyorlar ve yaşadıkları yerde de hakim olarak bu katliama katılmış fail olan insanlarla bir arada yaşıyorlar ve bunlar hala toplum üzerinde etkili kişiler, denetim kuruyorlar ve yasalarının ötesinde bir denetim bu. Dolayısıyla bu size bilgi verenler böyle bir durumla nasıl başa çıkıyor? Çünkü burada hala faillerin işleri ellerinde tuttuğunu görüyorsunuz ve şiddet ortamının da devam ettiğini görüyorsunuz. Korkarım böyle bir soru panelin tamamen yeniden başlamasına yol açabilir. Dolayısıyla izninizle ben şimdi dördüncü konuşmacımıza söz vermek isterim. Ondan sonra tekrar sorulara döneriz.
Would you like me to start again? Or, okay.
Yes, please. Yes.
Start again? Good afternoon, everyone, again. I wrote the first version of this paper back in August when I thought I had completed it. However, a month later, when I was chatting to a good friend, Müge, I found myself sharing with her fragments from my own family story, which made me recall what once the late Hrant Dink had reminded me, that it was all right to share my vulnerabilities with others.
kendisi ne anlatırsa onu anlatıyordu. Ben aslında doğrudan doğruya onlar kamerana bakıyorlardı. Ben kenarda duruyordum ve dinliyordum. Bir bakıma gizleniyordum köşede. Ondan sonra bu çekilmiş olan bölümleri incelediğim zaman mümkün olduğu kadar psikanalizi aracım olarak kullanıyordum. Kültür ve psikolojinin nasıl bireysel ve kolektif benliğin çatlakları içinde birbirlerini etkilediğini görüyordum. Bütün bu insanlara çok borçluyum. Bana güvendikleri ve kendi ruhlarının özel köşelerine beni soktukları için onlara teşekkür ederim. Bunları aslında bu atalarını kaybeden insanların yaşadığı acıya tanıklık ettim ve bu kayıtlar sırasında suskunlukları, endişeleri aslında o kadar çok şey söylüyor ki bir puzzle'ları bir araya getirmenin yöntemi onlar da aslında çoğu zaman geride bıraktıkları insanların nasıl kuşaklar ötesinden kendilerini etkilediği ortaya çıkıyor. Bizim Anadolu'daki nehirlerimiz iskeletlerle dolu olmalı. Aslında bu çoğu insan tarafından düşünülen bir şey. Çünkü birçok kadın ses burada tecavüz edildikten veya yakınlarının şiddete maruz kalıp öldüğünü gördükten sonra nehirleri atlayıp intihar eden kadınlardan söz ediyor. Bu nehirler aslında tehcir yürüyüşleri sırasında da toplu çöplükler gibi, cesetlerin atıldığı çöplükler gibi kullanılmış. Bunu da biliyordu insanlar. Birçok bebek ve küçük çocuk aslında ağaçların altında bırakılmış veya Türk veya Kürt komşularına vererek bırakmışlar. Bunların tekrar gören çok az var. Sadece çok az bir sayıda insan bu insanların yeniden, çocukları yeniden görüyor. Bunlar Müslüman olmuş durumda. İstanbul'da ve Anadolu'da saha çalışmalarım sırasında Müslümanlaşmış Ermeni hayat sağ kalmış insanların çocuklarıyla ve torunlarıyla karşılaştım. Onlar bazen de bana yeni insanlar tanıştırdılar. Bazen de mesela metroda giderken insanlarla sohbet ederken tanıştım. Bazı tanıklarımız için bir Ermenilikleri aslında üzerinde konuşulmamış ve üzerinde konuşulamayacak bir geçmişin bir anısı gibi ve bugün çok fazla bir şey ifade etmiyor aslında. Müslümanlaşmış konuşmacıların çoğunluğu benim açık açık konuşmak adı altında İstanbul'da 2010'da depoda yapmış olduğum sergiden dolayı benimle temas etmiş olan insanlardı. Bu atölye sırasında, bu sergi sırasında bulunduğum bir atölyede açık bir kamera bıraktım ve kendi başına konuşmamı isteyen insanlar buraya konuştular. Bazı Müslümanlaşmış tanıklar için Ermenilikle bağlantıları bir yük gibi görünüyordu ve ruhlarının çok derinliğinde gizlilik, merak, korku ve geçmiş hakkındaki sıkıntılarını ifade ediyordu. Aynı zamanda bazı insanlar, Hristiyanlar geri dönmüş konuştuğu tanıklar arasında. Psikanalist Doktor Dorilav, travmanın insan üzerindeki etkisi konusunda uyarır. Bir dinleyici aslında bunları dinliyorsa gelecekte tehlikelerle dolu bir yol yürüyecektir. Benim kendi deneyimim bunları dinlerken gerçekten de beni kendi saklanma yerime geri döndürdü. Benim Ermeniler üzerine çalışmakta olan arkadaşlarım aslında bana zaten biraz kaygıyla sorular soruyorlar. 2004 yılından itibaren önce hem Ermenileri üzerine 2000'li yılların başında Müslümanlaşmış Ermenileri keşfetmiştik. Sonra Sabiha Gökçen'in gerçek kimliği Ağustos'ta ortaya çıkmıştı Arthur Sevinçen olarak. Ama bunların gerçekten Türk olduğunu söyleyenler de vardı. Ben erkenden şunu görmüştüm. Benim anneannemin annesi Kürt arkadaşları genç insanlar olmadan
Okay now? Still no.
Do you know where it stopped? Do we know where it
I
stopped?
have no idea. Tam orada kaldık, Ermüs'te.
Teşekkür ederim.
Okay? We stopped at the Ermüs. Oh, great, thank you. Yes, please.
They didn't know how to pray. They didn't know how to pray, nor how to make the sign of the cross. We just played. Until we became adolescents, they used to identify themselves as Ermüs, as Ermeni Müslüman, among ourselves, until they were no longer kids playing games, and until things had become too complex to be spoken about, while I continued sharing my Easter eggs with them. This photograph is from the wedding day of my maternal grandmother, Mari, with her groom Hrant in 1940 in Istanbul. The page boys standing in front of them are my grandmother's nephews. The one in the navy outfit is her cousin Rosa's son, Sergio, known as Baron Sarkis-Seropyan to some of you. And the other one is her sister Armenui's son, Yilmaz. Sergio and Yilmaz played football when they were little. Here's my grandmother Mari on the left and her cousin Rosa on the right. Mari's mother Bayzar and Rosa's mother Zarui were sisters from Balat, Istanbul. Both Bayzar and Zarui got married to doctors who graduated from the military medical school and then served the Ottoman army. Harutyun was Bayzar's husband, Parunak Zaruhi's. Harutyun was appointed as a military doctor to Safranbolu. He was killed after being poisoned by his colleagues during the Balkan War in 1913. His wife was not made aware of this. Instead, she was advised by the general's order that Harutyun was going to be appointed to a higher position in Istanbul as a reward for his sentences to the army. Bayzar, pregnant with my grandmother at the time, went to Istanbul with her children, thinking her husband was going to join them. Other than Harutyun, was later found dead by their neighbors and his body discarded by the river. My grandmother was born after that, as the sixth child of the remaining family. Meanwhile, Parunak was appointed as a military doctor to Gümüşhane. His body was found beheaded by the river just before his family was deported in 1915. On the way, my great-aunt Zaruhi was obliged to leave her youngest child, Lusin, who was 18 months with a Turkish family in Ain. After surviving the genocide, she was not able to find her again. Lusin must have been among many Armenian babies and young children raised with Muslim faith as Turks, Kurds, or Arabs without knowing their true identity. During and after the genocide, the two sisters were not able to contact each other. On 24th April 1915, in Istanbul, Bayzar's and Zarui's father was taken away and never came back. In the next years, Bayzar's two eldest daughters were kidnapped to be married to Turkish men. Armenuhi, the mother of Yilmaz, one of the page boys in the wedding picture, insisted and managed to keep her Christian faith and her Armenian name. But she was always called Gavur, and reminded she was morally wrong and an infidel by her husband's family and the neighbors. She also had to face physical abuse on a daily basis and died young as a result of being beaten up by her husband. After her mother's death, young Yilmaz did not play with Sergio again, though he stayed in touch with my family after he grew up. On the other hand, Arşalus, the oldest sister, had to convert to Islam. Subsequently, her name was changed to Muzaffer, which etymologically signifies victory in Turkish. At the beginning, she occasionally kept in touch in secret with her Armenian family. Then, out of fear, she cut all ties and was forced to hide away. Her son, İsmet, grew up to become a xenophobic person as part of those in society in need of an enemy, in his case, the Armenians. To keep his Sunni Muslim Turkish identity alive and to stand for the mirror image of a Gentile and respectable element of the modern society, within the new Republic of Turkey, he not only concealed his maternal Armenian background and turned himself into a non-Armenian, but he also realized that he had to become an anti-Armenian. Perhaps he had recognized the frailty within his mother's true identity as a shameful threat, which would have prompted him to de-Armenize himself and to dissolve it, instead of choosing the indeed more complex option of acknowledging it in some way, perhaps at a later stage in his life. The grandchildren, brought up as stereotypical Kemalists, were not even aware that their ancestors were Armenian and continued externalizing their antagonisms towards the Armenians. My grandmother had always carried her pain in her heart. Are all Armenian accounts so complex, so untimely? Have people from Turkey always had such multifaceted experiences? The expression always has an infinity implemented to it, as it refers to both the before and the after. The continuity of a culture and memory are linked in a dynamic process that plays an essential role within our psyches. There is the past-present distinction perspective, which contains several temporal points of view. Not only is there the presence of present things, but also the presence of past things. One also must consider that individual and collective memory both converge into social memory. Yet one cannot choose one's memories, neither as an individual nor as a society. Scientists identify the brain as the organ responsible for memory, linking it to our thoughts, emotions, and soul, whilst ancient civilizations believed the heart was the core of our memory. The heart, as a symbolic center of emotion, when it's under threat, tries to protect itself. Then again, according to a Turkish saying, the softest and most vulnerable part of the body is the abdomen. By alluding to the conundrum that life and identity are not two separate entities, but continually creating one another, one of my third-generation Islamized Armenian speaker explained in 2006.
Ülkemizde gerçekten yumuşak karnımız din ve ırktır. Hep oraya vururlar.
This is you. Okay, adamda yok. Okay, I'm going to say this. Bizim ülkemizde gerçekten yumuşak karnımız din ve ırktır. Hep oraya vururlar. In Turkey, they always sit us on our soft tummy, which holds the very subject matter of race and religion. He went to explain that, from the politician to the tradesman to the taxi driver, the process by which socio-ethnic and socio-political opinions are formed in this country has always been based on issues around race and religion and not on cultural practices. He was not only referring to post-genocidal traumatic memory, but his remark was drawing on from Hamidiye and Adana massacres to 1915, 1938, 20 Kura military service to 6 September to 1970, 1980, and 19 January. My speaker, whose sister preferred to convert back to Christianity, identified himself as someone with Muslim faith. Similar to some of my other speakers, he first realized that he was Armenian during his childhood, when he was belittled by their neighbors' children yelling at him, Ermeni oğlu Ermeni dönme piç, son of an Armenian, son of a converted bastard. Then he revealed that, after his father passed away, he began looking at his father's fear through a different perspective, understanding that conversion to Islam must have been the only way to survive, and his father had wanted his children to forget and be assimilated in order to protect them. Yet, as my speaker acknowledged, that for him, like many others, the concept of covering up one's true identity made them isolated in the society. His remarks, reminding their survival, parallel political theories, Hannah Arendt's concept of isolation and alienation of Jewish people as pariah. This concept suggested the outcasts of the society are deprived of their human rights, which is supported by philosopher Helga's theory on fear or the terror of death due to oppression. My speaker elucidated, we are labeled goods in this country. Maybe they keep us for our labor. We work hard. We are always loyal, pay our taxes, and keep our silence. Though it's as if we shouldn't exist since the public see us as a piece of dirt. My speaker's remark of being conceived as dirt can be analyzed with psychiatrist and philosopher Frantz Fanon's evaluation of Hegel's master-slave dialectic through his critique of Western colonialism. By this process, we can observe the way in which the Islamized Armenian subject is marked as a dirty thing, indicates that his individuality and liberty is denied. In Fanon's expression, focusing on the role of race and violence, the black subject is considered as machine, animal, man, as a dehumanized thing object. Accordingly, then the Islamized Armenian subject is the slave who becomes an instrument against which the master measures his own superiority. Consequently, she becomes dependent on this thinghood and on its definition as a thing by the master. Whilst the master achieves his recognition through another consciousness, out of fear of annihilation or death, the slave accepts her negation by the other. Thus, through this acceptance and by negating her himself, he does the same thing as the master does, which in turn enters him into isolation. Several testimonies demonstrated that the majority of the subjects have not only dipped their toes into those ancient rivers, but they have faced the ghost by going through the many layers of those rivers. As I'm reconsidering Arendt's self-conscious pariah that can transform difference from being a source of weakness and marginality into one of strength and defiance, I'm reminded that religion is only one of the floating signifiers of identity, which is never fixed, but always in flux. Having read a multitude of books on Armenian culture and history, with great determination, my speaker said,
benim babam bize bir şeyler anlatmadı. Ben çocuklarıma anlatıyorum. Anlatacağım. Kaçış yok. Gizli de olsa konuşacağım. Sadece kültürlerle de olsa konuşacağım. Sadece ırktaşlarımla da olsa konuşacağım. Yani ben bunu patlarım yok.
Benim babam anlatmadı bana ama ben çocuklarıma anlatıyorum, anlatacağım da. Kaçış yok, gizli de olsa konuşacağım. Sadece kültürlülerle de olsa konuşacağım. Sadece ırktaşlarımla da olsa konuşacağım. Yani ben bunu Patlarım yoksa. My father didn't explain anything to us, but I'm explaining it to my children, and I'm going to continue to do so. There is no escape from it. Even if it's going to be privately, I'm going to talk. Even if it's only going to be with the educated ones, I'm going to talk. Even if it's only going to be with people from the same racial background as mine, I'm going to talk. Otherwise, I'm going to explode. And he continued.
Ben bu ülkede haklı, haksız, birbirlerini öldürmüş insanların 3. kuşak evladıyım. Ve ben hala 100 yıl geçmiş, hala ben onun acısını çekiyorum. Lütfen ya beni de kesin ya da yaşatın ya.
Ben bu ülkede haklı haksız birbirlerini öldürmüş insanların 3. kuşak evladıyım. Ve ben hala 100 yıl geçmiş, hala ben onun acısını çekiyorum. Lütfen ya beni de kesin ya da yaşatın yahu. I'm the third generation of a people who killed each other, guilty or not guilty. 100 years on, I'm still suffering the pain. Please, either kill me as well or make me live. And I indeed stick to that. Many thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Actually, we're supposed to have a break. I am unable to stop right now, to tell the truth. I would like to use some of the coffee break for the questions, if the speakers will stay with me. And those of you who can't, stay, please feel free to leave, but I would like to take a few questions and go on for 10 more minutes. There's a question. Beyaz. Okay. Önce şu tarafa alıyorum beyefendi, sonrası. Buyurun.
Ben Ermen...
I was born in Aleppo, and I grew up in Armenia. But once the border was open, I came to the Western Armenia very often. I saw many people. I won't say who they were. Just as you conducted research, so did I. In one village, we were making the crucifix, and the mayor of the village came and took us away, and there was a man there, a tall man, very handsome, and we asked him, why did they bring us here? We were afraid. And then this man I took a liking to, and I asked him, where did you come from? From Adana. Where? From Adana. Hasanbeyli, he said, and I started crying because my mother and father are from Hasanbeyli. They came there from Zeytun. And why do you cry? He said. I asked him, who are you? I'm a Turk. And then he went and brought us some tea, and he came back. And he took me to one side, and he said, my second mother is an Armenian. And then he went away again, and he came back. And he said, do you know? My uncle's son is also Kaptan, and his mother is also an Armenian. And I understood then that he was totally Armenian. I saw so many converted Armenians in Himshin and in other places. Now, I have a question to all of you, and I would like to make another, explain something else. Now, these converted Armenians I saw in Erciş marry amongst themselves. For example, Armenian Christians do not marry with one another before the 7th generation. But these Muslimized, Islamicized Armenians, how do they marry one another? That's one thing. And it's also not accepted in Armenia, the Islamicized Armenians. This is a historical problem, because just as the Armenians outside Armenia have become Muslims, they are under the same pressure. For hundreds of years, they lived under that pressure. And for 70 years, they were forced to live as atheists. And then once they were liberated, as Christians. So I don't know either, who am I? I was raised in a Christian culture because they had come from abroad. They were Christians and they had their culture, but we couldn't go to church. Today, Armenia cannot accept other Armenians immediately, because they would say Muslims have come to live in Armenia, but we are Christians. But they're not really Christians. But all of these have to be accepted because Armenians are Armenians. And this will take time. It won't happen overnight. Thank you. If we have 2 short questions, please.
Thank you to all of you for your... Is this on? Oh, it is on. Thank you for your papers. My question is to Helin, Anahit. If I understood correctly, you have this corpus of 500 interviews, and I wonder if you could shed some light on the following. I had conducted an interview about 1.5 years ago. The important portion is that it's the story, it's a family history. Part of it is that there is this young man who is converted or converts himself to Islam, is taken into a Muslim family, whether it's Turkish or Kurdish, I don't know. During the 1920s or 30s, he leaves or escapes. Coming to Istanbul in 1940, he wants to marry an Armenian. And at that point, the church tells him that they can't marry him, whether that's internal policy or state policy, I don't know, because officially he's registered as a Turk and as a Muslim. The man then goes to court, and the individual who was giving this interview did so because they wanted to safeguard the court document. And the court document is recognition of the man's previous Armenian identity, and it's explaining that we officially recognize that his name had been changed, and we give back his original name, which was Armenian, and we give back to him his original identity or his religion as being a Christian. I wondered if in that corpus, that wealth that you have you come across a story like this at all, and can you shed any light?
Armenian church in Echmiadzin does accept Muslim Armenians as Armenians.
But sorry, we don't have time for this. I'm sorry, you can speak in the coffee break maybe, but you know, if there is not one urgent question, okay, then we have to just close, unfortunately.
A statement and a quick question for the lady who can't find any Armenians in Adana. Now, that's where the problem comes in. I can identify for her at least 10 in Adana, but I can't talk about them. Now, there is one thing that those Islamized Armenians, they don't want to talk and appear, etc. There are also on our side, which we know of close relations with them, but we can't talk for their safety. So there is a taboo on both sides. I don't know how many people are in that category. Now, it's a dilemma I am in. I cannot talk about my uncle, that's where, and family, etc. So in Adana, there are, believe me, but unfortunately we can't.
Yeah.
What's the way? What's the solution?
Yeah.
How late, how long am I going to keep silent? Not only them.
Yeah. Thank you for comment. I'm sure we all have cases like yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so would you like to answer the questions? Is there any comment you want to make?
Professor, ask
Yeah,
a
about
question.
the
I want to
questions.
answer.
Okay.
There was a question
Would
that
you,
hasn't been answered.
would you like to?
No, it's okay.
There was the people obviously are leaving.
Okay.
now. So let's go.
Let them go.